Oh, thank you very much. And may I invite onto the stage, first of all, AJ Chowdhury from BCGX, Harry Mallins, Aerospace Technology Institute, and Dr. Mohammed Asmat from Massachusetts University. Welcome. I think there you are. And on screen, we also have Dr. Ralph Belusa and Jay. So welcome all of you. There you go. Thank you. So we've just had a really interesting use case there, and I think one of the opening questions for me would be around the array of technologies and assets that an organization needs to have to really make digital twins and the metaverse useful for them, for their clients, for their stakeholders. So, Mohammed, I'm going to ask you first.
Well, I think it's a different technologies combined together. That includes, of course, blockchain and artificial intelligence. And we should not forget Internet of Things and big data, which is at the foundation of everything else that's happening around the world in terms of technology and whatnot. Metaverse or digital twin is a kind of technology that would surely has a potential to revolutionize the manufacturing side, the supply chains, and would, of course, touch many other sectors. That's me keeping it short.
Thank you. Harry, how about data? Because aerospace, I mean, there's so much data that's generated within the sector, whether it's in outer space, low Earth orbits, there's all sorts of different points at which we're collecting that. What other assets do you think that can really be used and to make this metaverse useful for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as you mentioned, clearly IoT technologies, sensing technologies, whatever the use case within aerospace, really, because there's a lot of data coming out of sort of the production system, but then if you're looking at sort of operational use cases of an aerospace asset, the amount of data that you can get from an aircraft, for example, is sort of mind-blowing. So being able to sense, being able to analyze and process that data is clearly, clearly absolutely essential, but also the security of that data as well. So there's a real need for high levels of computing power, secure networks, IoT, big data capability, and also some of the advanced modeling capability as well. So in aerospace in particular, physics-based models. So yeah, a whole sort of array of technologies that are needed.
Thank you. And AJ, I mean, you've seen the metaverse be brought to very many industries globally. What do you think is the first thing that organizations, or you check that organizations have before they can really embark on that journey in a way that's going to, if not guarantee success, at least signal that there may be success at the end of the journey?
Yeah, so the metaverse is very much at its infancy at the moment. And I think a lot of organizations are beginning to take baby steps trying it. The kinds of use cases we're seeing as being pretty successful at the moment are things like training, where we work a lot with oil and gas companies, so be able to train people on what might happen on an oil rig, for instance, using the metaverse, using 3D VR, using lots of people collaborating on it, is a very, very powerful use case and far better than necessarily doing it in 2D. And then laddering up from there to be able to say, now let's look at things like supply chains. Once you've got the supply chains, now let's look at much more collaborative R&D, etc. So we see that if they start small, see that it works, and then start saying, okay, now let's go to the next stage and the next stage, that's far more powerful than, hey, let's go all in and build something, because you really don't know where the technology is going to be in the next 3 to 5 to 7 years.
Thank you. Jay, could I bring you into the conversation? And pity that you can't be with us here, but nice to see you on the screen, although you're way over there for us. Estee Lauder, I mean, you have so many different use cases. Most of them are actually directed, I think, at the consumer, at the end user of your products. How do you use it internally to perhaps optimize those supply chains and manage those inventories?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the way we look at, right, I think, again, who we are as a company, we look at three major areas, right? One is customer centricity in terms of digital experience, how consumers we touch, right? But in terms of whether they're walking into our stores or digital channels, what should be the experience looks like, right? Whether it's a same day, next day delivery, the returns management, or even how consumers want to use the products and feel it digitally as well as physically, right? That's one big area of opportunity. The second area I would say, as a company, we operated, economies of scale, whether it's 140 plus countries, 30 plus brands. So everything we do, about the economies of scale, how do you really enable functions to deliver products with excellence? That means digitization across every function, right? Whether it's integrated planning or warehouse management, automation, or whether it's a collaboration with our partners, with our retail partners as well as the third-party manufacturers, and everywhere. How do you really enable digitization so you can get insights, on the fingertips and make smart decisions? Finally, I would say innovation, right? We are powered by our 30 plus brands, innovating new products and new ideas constantly. And digitization is essential to that function, whether it's using purpose-built AI, machine learning, leveraging some of our, iconic products in the past and bringing back to the, new customers. All those areas needs, AI, especially machine learning AI models, very powerful to use and innovation cycles.
Thank you. And can you then use it as a predictor of demand then? Because if you're gathering this, all of this data, and you're seeing, in this case, literally where people are being attracted to new products that you're offering, do you then link that back to how you plan for your products to come into different stores?
Yeah, that's a big use case. The AI machine learning, I think we are past 3 years, we're doing a lot of innovation experimentation about how to really use these data sets, coming from, tens and thousands of stores and channels, even the social information. How do you bring and collate them together so we can make sense out of that, we can predict better, and we can respond better? That's been the lot of hard work going into that. And I can tell you, there's a lot of learning out there, right? Especially using AI machine learning there.
Brilliant, thank you. Ralph, I think that links in very nicely with your industry because obviously, shipping a huge part of global supply chains. How are you using digital twins and maybe the metaverse more generally to plan how you get products from A to B, to maybe look at how you even interact with all the different stakeholders in your very, very complex ecosystem?
Wonderful, and thank you so much, and thanks for the invitation. It's great to be with you and all the panelists together. And I think it's important for the metaverse and what we see, what's coming up with the IoT devices, so to say, also with Hapag-Lloyd, one of the biggest shipping and logistic companies, also in worldwide active, so to say. If we look at IoT devices for all the containers, we see Hapag-Lloyd is equipping all his containers with IoT devices that we collect the data with temperature, position, humidity, all the different kinds of data, what we can collect from the goods, from the containers itself. But logical, if we think forward about it, we see we have all the data and the digital twin via the IoT devices from a container. Then if we look forward to the vessels with all the machineries, the industrial metaverse, with all these kind of digital twins of the engines and all these kind of stuff are more or less coming up and are in place. So the container has a digital twin, the vessel has a digital twin. If we look over for the ports like Rotterdam or Singapore or Wilhelmshaven in Germany and so on, different kinds of ports also have the digital twins connecting to each other from the ports. Then we have the trucks and the rail, and you see the things are connecting, and you can count now 1 and 1 together from a container, vessel, port, train, truck, the company to deliver the goods. We have all kinds of digital twins, so the digital side, the physical side, and this in bringing to the metaverse together. From my side of view, to give you also a bit of a kind projection, I would see that a bit provocative to say now in 10, 15 years, do we have normal 2-dimensional web pages anymore to do some ordering or some bookings or track our goods and containers or book some stuff there? I would guess not, because in 15 years, with that immersiveness of metaverse, 3D immersive virtual realities, doing these kind of bookings, managing and analyzing and predicting and helping the supply chain. This will be all managed in a complete whole different kinds of metaverse systems, because that we see now, I see that this will become easier and easier to predict, to manage, to simulate, to take conscious decision with the help of AI, with IoT devices. So that's really just calculating one and one together what's coming up in the next couple of years.
So and anyone who's ever dealt with data knows that there are normally huge problems in cleaning data and make sure that it's interoperable. Have you not encountered that problem? Because you're talking about connecting, widely different sectors and actors. When you're building your metaverse, when you're building these digital twins, how is it that you make sure that the data is rendered in a way that is true to all of those different environments?
So short answer from my side here, and handing over also. I see, okay, we know all these kind of frameworks like data lakes or data ocean to put that into that direction, but we see also and test some kind of these decentralized organization, these DAOs, to see that it's applicable where the data gets generated, that it's stored there and then it's connected via security layers and so on. So these kind of new modern decentralized systems are much more secure, much faster to act and combine to each other. It took us not so long to put everything in one data lake, data ocean, and do the merge and transactions and all that kind of stuff. So data is key because in and out, but I think there's also new frameworks coming up which accelerate also these kind of developments and make it that also easier and faster to adapt to new data lakes, to new data sources and changing data.
Thank you. So two predictions. Thank you, Ralph. So there were two predictions there, I think, from Ralph. One is that the data is going to be moving closer to the edge, which obviously it's something that many organizations are exploring at the moment. What is it that needs to be processed at device level? What is it that needs to be sent to the cloud? And the other was that we're going to see an end of two-dimensional bookings. Mohammed, what are your views on that?
So I think these points stand some ground, of course, but we have to understand one thing, that in the past decade, we have seen an explosion of different innovations and innovative technologies. If you just look back in early 2000s, you would not have heard about Internet of Things, you would not have heard about so commonly artificial intelligence and other things. And I'm talking about the general public, not the experts who have been working in this area. So we have seen in the past couple of years especially, there has been an exponential growth in understanding and understanding the use cases for these technologies and everything. And now suddenly general public is starting to wonder what is the future like, what these technologies hold for us. And that is what we have to sort of focus on today if we want to make most out of this whole scenario, and we want to make sure that we find applicable solutions, we find some use case scenarios for the general population. We need to first and foremost understand and perfect the basic and underlying technologies like big data and IoT to make metaverse work, to make digital twin work and all these things. Now, the problem with the data or big data is that we see problems with its mining, with its cleansing, manipulation, and we see that these are the things that are sometimes beyond our control, because the way you collect data, what kind of data you're collecting, how you're storing it, how you're recalling it, and then you just combine it all together in a cloud computing systems. And then suddenly it becomes the internet-involved system that needs the internet to access all that kind of stuff. So the lines are so blurry these days among different technologies. We need to sort of understand that big data in its isolation maybe is nothing. How big is big data? It's just like Excel spreadsheets and everything else like that. And then we have to understand if we want to create an impact out of this, then we need to connect it with the internet and bring in cloud computing and whatnot. And then suddenly, Internet of Things, Internet of Devices, Internet of Computing, and all this is sort of combined together. And then from there onwards, we have to look at things not in isolation, but in integrated fashion. So these are some of the things that we need to sort of look into, try to identify, perfect, learn, and create in the process, create the awareness, and of course make it more adoptable and everything else. So this is a generic and overall picture of our current standing, where we are and what we are looking at, and how we actually can reach there. Of course, as Ralph was saying, that we need to take some sort of baby steps to reach that point.
So essentially a convergence of technologies.
Yes.
And you refer to the IoT 10 years ago or 20 years ago, nobody'd heard of it except maybe specialists. But to be honest, you can say that of ChatGPT 12 months ago. So I think that acceleration of new technologies that we can explore and hopefully make or gather some value from is going to increase. That, of course, brings its own challenges. So, Harry, to you, I mean,
just to put it in perspective, this IoT thingy, to give the stats out there for fun, in 2016, there was a survey out, people who knew IoT, what IoT means, only around 16 to 17% people actually agreed that they know what IoT is. It is in 2016 and 15 or 16. And in 2018, this survey was repeated. Can you imagine the number of people who said that they understand what IoT is, or at least they have heard of it? 87%. In just 2 years' time. That's the explosion of understanding. Sorry.
Yes, okay.
Just fun fact.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the fun fact indeed. So, Harry, I mean, this explosion of technologies, convergence of technologies, what does that mean for sectors like aerospace, where you're super reliant on standards? I mean, it's one of the most regulated industries on earth. And for training people within the aerospace industry, because it's one thing to have an embedded systems engineer, and that's another to have a data scientist. You then need a data engineer. It's not the same thing. So how are you dealing with that increased complexity and need to have multiple skills?
So I think the technology point is an interesting one, and the advances in technology enable the development of some really sort of, if you like, exquisite digital twins. All bells and whistles, gold standard, that can do a lot. And probably the primes, the big aerospace companies, can develop those. And they can learn how to leverage the technologies. They can pay for digital twins. But I think part of the fundamental challenge is probably further down in the supply chain. And if you're thinking about supply chain optimization and inventory levels, in aerospace at the moment, as the lady who was on the stage before talking about the airport mentioned, aerospace is ramping up post-COVID. You've got a huge increase in inventory levels. You've got a huge increase in working capital requirement, and that largely sits in tier 2 or 3 companies, i.e. they're down the supply chain. They probably can't afford an exquisite digital twin based on advanced technologies. So what can they do? What are some of the more entry-level digitalization technologies? Or how can we work as a sector to try and standardize and work across the primes and the OEMs down into the tiers to try and deploy the technologies, but also to upskill the workforces? Because at the moment, if you start to get down into the supply chain, you don't have a lot of digital natives. So there's a huge challenge there, I think.
Jay, you're nodding away there. I know that you've had several clients that, yes, digital tools are wonderful, but that we don't have the budget to deploy them where we need them, particularly not on a nationwide scale. So what are your views on this?
One of the really interesting use cases that I've seen a shift over the last few years, where typically people would have a physical asset and then they would build a digital twin of that asset and see how that twin operates. What we're finding now, it's flipping. So BMW was setting up a new factory, and they worked with NVIDIA. Even before they set up the factory, they created a complete digital twin of that factory. And they had robots in the factory, they had things operating in that factory, they could program the robots to do things. And why this was useful was basically they managed to iron out the kinks in the factory before they actually built it. Once they ironed out the kinks and they knew that this thing was working, at that point they could break ground and say, okay, now let's build the actual physical thing. And what they found was the productivity they got from that factory was much, much, much higher, because it could get up to speed months and months quicker than otherwise. So that just paid for itself in the way that they did that. We're working right now with a large oil and gas company in their upstream operations, where they've got wells and drilling and so on and so forth. And as you can imagine, if you're managing a bunch of wells and you're drilling, you've got thousands and thousands of suppliers giving you parts, etc., to run that. So we've created a complete digital supply twin of that, where they can see in real time where the suppliers are, what's happening with the parts. If they then begin to see a bottleneck in this part of their twin, they can sit down and say, okay, let's make changes on this part right now before it actually hits them. So these kinds of use cases pay for itself very, very quickly, and you can see hundreds of millions of dollars being saved by doing this. And that's the piece that I think is very interesting. My slight concern with just the metaverse at the moment is it's a bit of a hammer looking for a nail. So you've actually got to find those narrow use cases where you say, okay, this is where the real value is added, and it's doing it better than an alternate technology. And I think that's the question people are not asking themselves enough, saying, why would this be better than doing it in a different way? And if it's not better than doing it in a different way, well, stick to the way you've got. Now, we'll see what happens when Apple's device actually gets into the mass market, or companies start using it much more. But as I said in the beginning, we're still at our infancy in doing this.
So it's the blockchain or DLT conversation all over again. If it's,
I hope not.
Leaving that aside. So, Jay, coming to you then on that point, what do you think, what piece of advice would you give to anyone in the audience that wants to build a digital twin of their supply chain? What are the things that they should really consider to avoid making some of the mistakes or taking some of the wrong turns that you may have done? I'm not saying that you did or didn't, but just in case it gets you into trouble. But a piece of advice for people thinking that they would quite like to embark on this journey.
Yeah, I think some of the panelists already touched upon it, right? I mean, data infrastructure is so critical, right? A lot of times it's not just getting external data, even internal data, right? Within a corporate setup, right? How do you break the functional barriers, right? And getting the transparent data is a hard challenge for most companies, right? I think definitely that should be the first fundamental or table stakes, everyone needs to manage. I think once you have the data layer, I would say your digital twin, how do you really operationalize, right? It needs to be purpose built. I think, I do agree, a lot of technologies could converge there, whether it's a purpose built AI, or even, a lot of the new use cases could emerge from the generative AI, and especially the immersive, right? So how do you really build a digital twin that really focus on the narrow areas where you have return on investment? One of the big area of opportunity, especially we're looking into this, is digital supply chain control towers, right? So when you want to do a corporate IBP, especially with geographically diverse companies, many brands and all, a lot of people doing a work from home hybrid setup, how do you bring people together, right? So immersively, you could, look at the reports, insights, having those interaction. I believe, the control towers, supply chain control towers is a huge use case, especially where, metaverse and AI could really converge to make it more effective. Finally, I would say, it's a mindset shift, right? How do you really bring, all these technologies, right? Whether it's AI, machine learning models, or generative, or even, immersive AR, VR, computer vision. How do you really, bring some experimentation, right, in a rapid pace? And there will be a lot of throwaway investments, right? At the same time, whatever working, how do you scale across enterprise so that you really get your payback from those investments? Right? Those are my take.
Thank you. And we've only got a few minutes left, so I would like to open questions up for the audience. Does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, well, then final question from me to you all. What do you think is going to come after digital twins for organizations in supply chain and inventory management? What do you think is the next big issue that they should be tackling within your industry, for example, Harry?
Well, I think firstly, adopting digital twin is going to take a a while, to do that well and to do it across the multiple use cases. There are a huge number of other challenges within the aerospace sector at the moment. Getting to net zero is a clear one, and the sector's going through a big transformation, looking at alternative fuels, hydrogen-powered flight, for example. So that's going to be the big defining shift in the sector over the next couple of decades, I think. And the more that we can harness some of these technologies like digital twin to enable that and to bring down the cost of that transition, the better.
Yes, we saw that, I think, in the previous speaker she had on the screen. You could see the emissions and the GHGs as the aircraft were actually just in the airport and even taking off. I imagine that would go sky high at that point. AJ, what about you?
I think one of the big things people have to be careful about is data overload. Yeah. There's so much data that's going into these things, there's so much data coming out of these things. Unless it's designed extremely well, people are going to get overwhelmed by it. Because remember, at the end of the day, there are operators using these digital twins. These aren't sentient robots who are going to know exactly what to do. So if you're sitting in a control center and data is hitting you from all sides, you've really got to know what happens. We built one for a construction company, and they had massive amounts of construction equipment. But before we built it, they said, we're getting so much data, I didn't know if this piece of data is telling me that this device is low on windshield wiper fluid, or if it's on fire. So what ends up happening is they end up switching off a bunch of alerts, which is no good to anybody.
That's, so data overload, it's definitely a risk there. And Mohammed?
Well, I'll just add to this. I think both have raised really good points. But to me, I think simultaneously we have to look into the security element as well. The cybersecurity is one of the key components here that we often neglect or just sort of don't get enough representation from that. So metaverse, digital twin, or any such technology such as big data, Internet of Things, is nothing if we have not covered the ground with cybersecurity elements. So this is one last thing I would just like to add.
Absolutely. And with that, thank you all very much for taking part in the panel. AJ, Jay, Ralph, Harry, and Mohammed, thank you so much.